Right. Okay. So thanks a lot for the warm welcome, firstly. I feel really honored to be here talking about LCA at this webinar with Oren. So thanks a lot for inviting me for this. To all the participants, wish you all a very good evening or morning. I don't know where you guys are based, but hopefully today I'm able to, share some of my knowledge, share some of my expertise, and share some of the insights into what it takes to do a life cycle assessment. Like Arushi said, because it's a slightly technical topic, what I've done is I've prepared a basic presentation to begin with, and then maybe Arushi and I can get into a free-flowing conversation after that. So this is just to make sure that we're all on the same page and we're all clear about what LCA exactly means and what the benefits or advantages are of doing a life cycle assessment. So just give me a moment. I'm going to share my screen and then we can begin. Arushi, is it visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. Are the slides changing?
Yes, they are changing.
All right. Great. So let me first begin by quickly sharing some insights on why the really need for LCA really came about. So, one of the first LCAs were conducted way back in the 80s, if I'm not wrong. And these were done by companies like SABIC, Coca-Cola, even Volvo. They were one of the first few companies to do a life cycle assessment. And a lot of the senior practitioners that we see today have sort of come through the wins, the challenges, and so forth of having done LCAs from way past behind. So a lot of insights have come since then. Now we also have ISO standards that have streamlined the whole life cycle assessment process, right? So firstly, how do you know if a product is really eco-friendly or not? And I mean, one might argue that this question might be a little subjective, right? Because what you call eco-friendly, what you call sustainable, might be different from everybody's perspective. But I would like to go one step ahead and then ask, what can you do to make something more sustainable when you first analyze what it truly is, right? So LCA is one of those mediums that really helps you understand what is the current environmental impact of your product or a service or an organization, and how can you get from point A to point B in your whole journey to reduce your carbon footprint or other impacts on the environment. So these are some of the questions that I'd like to put forward to the audience, right? What does it really mean to have a complete environmental impact assessment conducted of your product, right? A product is manufactured using certain raw materials. These could come from local sources. It could come from international sources, right? You could manufacture it in multiple ways. You could use the product in an efficient manner or not so efficient manner. And finally, the way a product is disposed also directly or indirectly impacts the whole environmental journey of that product. So LCA really helps us to quantify this. And what does it really mean to have a green product? So this is one of the favorite conversations I like to have with a lot of our colleagues is if a product is zero waste, if a manufacturing process is zero waste, let's say, would you call it green? Or does it have, if it has 100% renewable energy, would you call that green? Right? There's also another criteria of, let's say, having a lot of recycled content in a product. Would you quantify that as a green product? Or if I'm reusing something time and time again, would that also qualify to being sustainable and so forth? So there's a multiple, let's say, ways in which one can quantify the environmental footprint. So I would say a true sustainable product is a combination of all of these, right? You cannot single out one and say one is more sustainable than the other. And having a life cycle approach really helps us to identify these hotspots, right? Whether is it your raw materials that are causing the footprint? Is it your electricity? Is it the use phase of the product where it's having most of the impact, right? So I like to give this example time and time again, right? It's the classic example of EVs versus petrol, right? And I'm sure a lot of us have had this debate multiple times. And if you actually go through some of the life cycle assessment studies being done on EVs versus petrol, you'll realize that to manufacture a car, uh, let's say a petrol car versus an EV, studies suggest that manufacturing a petrol vehicle is less harmful than manufacturing an EV, right? And this is mainly due to the rare earth materials, the batteries that are involved in the EVs during the manufacturing process. And when you go into the use phase of the car, this is when EVs actually catch up to petrol and go way past them. Because the amount of emissions that a petrol or a diesel car emits throughout its life, it could be 5 years, 10 years, even 15. That's when EVs really have a better advantage compared to petrol or diesel. And this has been clearly studied and published in a lot of papers. And then comes the end of life, right, of the vehicle. So what do you do with the batteries once EVs have to be scrapped? So a lot of studies have also shown that unless we bring in battery recycling into the system, we won't really have a solid payback over a
घर पे
petrol
हूँ
or a diesel car
घर पे हूँ
in comparison.
जी
If anyone is unmuted, may I please request you to go on mute?
Yes,
Yeah.
Faham, could you kindly go on mute? Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Right. Uh, and like Arushi mentioned, I was fortunate enough to be part of a study where we did this analysis of Pune city as a whole. If a city has to go sustainable, if it has to go net carbon neutral, what does it really have to do?
I'm so
Uh,
sorry for that. Yeah, I wish there
no
was a
worries.
way. Yeah, yeah.
No worries. I'll continue anyway. So one of the key insights that came out from that study was of course, this is all based on the study we did back in 2022. The figures might be different, the results might be different now. But one of the key insights I got was unless we move past the 40% renewable energy barrier in our electricity grid mix, we won't really have a cumulative saving on our carbon emissions when we switch to EVs, right? Because even if we switch to EVs, they are still powered through coal mostly today. And we did this whole analysis where we made a 10-year trajectory and we found out with a 10% mix, 20% mix, and a 40% mix, where at what stage are we actually reducing our emissions compared to petrol and diesel? And it turns out the 40% is sort of the thumb rule figure that you can go ahead with. So these were some of the key insights we got during the study, and that really helped me understand why do we really need to take a life cycle approach to things, right? So before I move ahead, I'd like to set a few guidelines here. Like there are a lot of LCA studies types out there. So these are the most, let's say, no, I wouldn't say widely used, but primarily LCA is classified in these three types. So we have an economic life cycle costing, and this is generally done to understand the economic, or let's say, a costing of a product or a service throughout its life. So right from acquisition of the product to its operation and maintenance, and the cost it takes to dispose the product at the end of its life. So that's calculated through LCC. A social life cycle assessment looks at the social angle of a product or a service. So we look at whether workers are paid properly, are they given fair wages, is the community which is being impacted by the product or the process being taken care of well. So social LCA looks at all of these things. And the most widely used, the most widely known also, I would say, is the environmental life cycle assessment, which is going to be the topic for today, where we look at the environmental impact of a product or a system with regards to its carbon footprint, or let's say energy mapping, or impact on water, let's say ozone depletion potential, and all sorts of things. I won't go too technical. So Arushi, please tell me if I'm going too much deep into any subject. Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
So quickly, I'll go through what really is LCA, right? So I'm sure you must have got some reading in place, but An LCA is really a complete assessment carried out for a specific product or a service, or even an organization, right? And it really helps us to understand the life cycle impacts of something. And there are specific guidelines given by ISO 14040 and 44 standard, which sort of creates a globally accepted framework on how LCAs have to be conducted, right? Because ultimately, the person that does the life cycle assessment is known as the life cycle practitioner. And a practitioner can really help to define the scope or the boundaries that have to be studied within a life cycle later on in the presentation as well. So as long as we stick to the ISO 14040-44 guidelines, we are ensuring that the studies that we published are relevant to the methodology which is being followed. And so these studies can be later on published and even perhaps shared for common knowledge. And a lot of the times now, even in ESG reports, especially in BRSR, they're asking, have you conducted LCAs of your products or not, right? So a lot of the ESG reporting frameworks are also coming up with systems where they're encouraging more and more companies to conduct life cycle assessments. And finally, there's also something called as an environmental product declaration. So this is nothing but, I like to call it, it's a third-party verified LCA study. So EPD has its own specific guidelines. It has its own rules under which an LCA is conducted and then verified as well. And EPDs are published documents. So they are publicly available LCA reports, you can say. And if a company wants to be truthful and impactful about the impact of its product, then generally EPDs are considered to be the best medium to sort of get that message out there. So yeah, this is just in brief. LCA, like I said, deals with the entire environmental impact of a product throughout its life. So right from acquisition of raw materials to the manufacturing, transport, where it is sold or used by the consumer, how it's disposed at the end of its life. And if there is any recycling element to it, yeah, we consider that as well. So depending on the kind of life stages you want to consider in your LCA, they are classified into multiple types. So you have cradle to gate, which only studies the raw material to manufacturing of a product or a service. And you have something called as a cradle to grave, which looks at the complete life cycle, right from raw materials to the final disposal or end of life of product, right? So you can choose what kind of LCA you want to do. If you only want to do it until the product is manufactured, entirely up to you, it's your choice. Or if you want to do a complete life cycle study, that's also up to you, right? And there are, I would say, three main categories in which you can put life cycle studies, right? One is a screening LCA. So a lot of customers and clients that come to us, they always complain, okay, LCA ka itna high cost kyun hai, right? Can we not do something easier for our own understanding? So what we usually recommend them is like a basic or a screening LCA, where we do a high level, let's say, assessment of the processes surrounding the manufacturing or the end of life of the product. But we don't deep dive into, let's say, each and every material or energy input or supply chain down the line, right? So here they're able to save on costs, but they're also able to get a thumb rule understanding of what is the true environmental impact of that product. Second is a detailed LCA. So here we go down to track as many energy and materials that are used by a product as possible, right from the manufacturing, use, and disposal of the product. And these are a lot more detailed, right? So we always ask for documented proofs to go along with the inventory that has been given to us. We also verify this at our end to make sure that the data is verified and validated. And this brings a lot more credibility and competency to the whole LCA. And finally, there's also something called as a comparative LCA, right? Where under the ISO norms, let's say if you want to make any environmental claims, you can choose to do a critical review of your LCA, where you have an independent body or independent expert who's going to review your LCA from a third-party perspective. And basically, it comes with a critical statement. So it brings a lot more trust within the practitioner, within the company that's trying to disclose the result of the LCA, right? Because it's reviewed by a third party. You've got three independent uh, uh, experts within a panel who've come and looked at your study. So that brings a lot of credibility to it. Now I'll come to the system boundary. I know it might look a little complicated, but I'll simplify this for you as much as possible, right? So you can see clear demarcation, four clear demarcations on top. That's A, B, C, and D. Okay. So A deals with the let's say manufacturing of the product. So right from raw material supply, as you can see in A1, all the way up to A5. That is the construction and installation process. So everything from raw material acquisition, how the products were transported to the facility of manufacturing, and from the manufacturing facility to the let's say site or facility where the product is being installed or used, that transport is also considered. And if there's any packaging involved, any 5 also considers that. And then we come to the B stage, which looks at the use stage of the product, right? And this is where I would say, I mean, depends on the product. If you're dealing with products in the construction sector, use stage might not be as relevant because once you install a tile or a cement or a steel in a building, there's not much use phase impact coming towards it, right? So a lot of LCAs you might find that they omit the B stage completely, or they might disclose a certain elements of the B stage, or they might look at only maintenance, right, or replacement or repair. And finally comes the end of life stage. So this deals with how a product has been disposed or recycled or processed at the end of its life. So it includes anything from deconstruction and demolition, right, from C1 all the way up to C4, how a product was disposed. So here, again, in the case of construction sector, of course, there's going to be demolition and deconstruction involved. So a lot of times, if that product has to be specifically taken aside and dismantled or demolished, we allocate impact to it. But because a lot of the materials are joined within a building, they're all mixed up, right? For example, once you install paint, once you apply paint on a wall, at the end of the building's life, you're not going to segregate the paint out from the adhesives or so forth, right? So a lot of the times, these are such minute impacts that they are not considered in the LCA itself. So these values are considered to be 0. But impact is allocated at the end of the life stage where the waste is being processed or disposed, right? It might go to a C&D recycling plant, like a construction and demolition recycling plant, or it might even be recycled and then reused in another project, right? So, and those impacts can be taken up in module D. So anything to do with the recovery or recycling potential of these materials has to be considered in module D, because these are slightly outside the system boundary that you're studying, right? Something that's recycled from your product may be used somewhere else, and that recycled product might avoid some virgin material which might be used in this case, right? So always module D is considered as a separate segment to A, B, and C. So these are the four, I would say, steps, four basic steps on how an LCA is conducted. So there are many softwares available to conduct an LCA, right? There's CIMA-Pro, there's Gabi, there's OpenLCA, there's EcoChain, and so forth. And all of these softwares are developed in a way it makes the lifecycle assessment process very easy to conduct. I would say softwares like CIMA-Pro and Gabi have been in use for many years now. They've been, so CIMA-Pro is a Dutch software. Gabi was initially developed in Germany, right? So a lot of these softwares are pretty matured at today's age to conduct these LCAs. So firstly, we need to identify what is the objective of the LCA, right? For example, if I'm doing LCA of 1 kg of steel, uh, uh, and my objective is to, let's say, publish an EPD, or my objective is to compare the results of my steel compared to other steel which is produced in the market. So whatever your objective is, whatever is the, let's say, unit, a declared unit or a functional unit that you want to study, it can be 1 kg of steel, it can be one water bottle, right? It can even be, let's say, 100 kilometers traveled from point A to point B, right? So it's up to you. What is that anchor that you need to first define to do your whole LCA around, right? So that's the first step. Second step comes in your whole inventory formulation. So once you identify, okay, I want to do LCA of 1 kg of steel, you need to really track back and create a map of that product life cycle around you. So what kind of raw materials were brought in to make that steel? How much energy was required to make that 1 kg of steel? You need to do some back calculations, mathematical calculations to really understand the life cycle of the product. Consider as many materials and energy inputs as possible, because that helps to make the LCA more accurate. And ultimately, you're going to come up with an inventory, and that inventory is what we can feed into the software, right, to do the whole impact analysis or get the results from the study. So once you have your inventory ready, the next step is to define, okay, under what impact assessment method am I going to analyze my results? Now, what I mean by impact assessment is, you might have heard of IPCC, right, the Intergovernmental Panel, right, on climate change. They have their own set of guidelines. There is another institute in Netherlands, which is called, I think it was Leiden University, that came up with a CML method of impact assessment. There is another one which is used in the construction industry, which is EN18, right, 502. So there are many methods in which one can analyze the results of the LCA, and you're free to choose what kind of impact assessment method that you want. And finally, once you have the results out, it's very important to understand how to interpret those results, right? By interpretation, I mean you could have your results in carbon footprint, you could have results in water depletion, you could have results in impact of that product on depletion of the ozone layer, or impact of the product on eutrophication. Eutrophication is, when you have excessive nutrients, high organic matter in the rivers. Those living in Pune might be able to relate, right? Because a lot of the Pune rivers are completely filled with hyacinth, right? They're all covered with biological matter. That's not necessarily a good thing. It really limits the growth of the plants and oxygens living under it. So LCA helps you to really quantify the impacts way beyond your carbon footprint, and that's the true beauty of it, I would say. So I'll quickly go through a study, and then we can stop with the presentation. I'm sure you're all eager to go through the whole discussion. So in this case study, I had done a life cycle assessment of a steel pallet, right? And the goal was to really understand what is the impact of making the steel pallet, using it, because a steel pallet is reused multiple times over, right? And disposing it at the end of its life. So, like I mentioned earlier, we need to start with a whole picture or a map of that product system in our minds. So you map out everything from the raw materials that were used, the transport of those materials to the manufacturing facility, right? And then you have multiple processes within the facility itself. All of those also have to be mapped out. And then finally, coming to the use phase, how many times is the product used? What kind of impact does it have at that stage? A lot of research has to be done. A lot of data gathering has to be done with the product owner on this. And finally, coming to the disposal. So you can analyze multiple ways in which that product is disposed, right? And finally, whether that product can be recyclable or not. Now, in my case, because it was a steel pallet, we know that steel can be recycled, right, and used again within the economy. So we also modeled the recycling potential of that product. And like I mentioned, so once you define your goal, you need to come up with an inventory, right? To make one steel pallet, how much steel is required, right? How much electricity is required? What is the amount of chemicals that go into it, or bolts and so forth? So you have to come up with your own laundry list of the energy and material usage at each stage of that product. And finally, what you get is a complete analysis of the impact of each energy and material on the footprint of the whole product. So here, the majority of the pie, as you can see, which is blue, it came from the manufacturing of steel, the use of steel in the whole product, right? And the rest of the impacts are allocated accordingly. So with this, we really came to know in a steel pallet, where are the impacts really coming from? One might also argue that if you're constantly reusing the pallet, that might also create impact, which is true, of course. It's going to have its own set of impacts, but you need to put it in some sort of context to see how bad is it or good is it, right? Compared to the overall picture of the whole product. So here you can see the reuse reverse logistics part isn't much as compared to the whole production of the steel pallet itself, right? And this sort of helps things to put things in, in perspective. So you're able to make informed choices when, creating a whole business model around it, marketing the product in a specific way, and so forth. Uh, I'll just quickly run through the applications, right? I mentioned EPD earlier, right? EPD is nothing but a third-party verified LCA study, which is publicly available. Uh, one might also get some marketing insights on how to communicate the environmental story of your product, right, through an LCA. A lot of the times, I'm not sure how many of us are aware of this. In a lot of green building certifications, the products that we use to construct a building, uh, the certification demands that you use as sustainable, recycled, or eco-friendly products as possible. And one of the ways in which they confirm this or have this as a criteria is having a Green Pro certification or an EPD of your product, right? And having an LCA done is one of the mandatory aspects of the certification as well. So this really helps bodies like IGBC and LEED to confirm whether the life cycle impact of their product is really what they say or not, right? If you're in the procurement division in a company, if you're making a decision based on a couple of products, but you don't know what is the true environmental impact of it, if you have those LCA studies in front of you, you could make a decision for yourself, right? Whether I want to choose a product which has a lower footprint in its manufacturing or use stage, depending on how you want to use it. And this will help you to make more informed choices to purchase the right product, right? And an LCA might also help architects and even product designers to choose the right materials, right design elements to lower the impact of their designs, right? And finally, I would say in policy analysis, also it comes in handy. Recently, we just finished an LCA for a biofuel, right? And that helps us really put the context around fuels in perspective. So we compared biofuels with petrol and diesel, and we were able to give good policy advisory to the government stakeholders based on the results of this whole study. So LCA can come in use in multiple ways, as you can see. And what I would really recommend the users is to read more about the ISO norms. And I would also recommend the listeners to read through what is called as a PCR. PCR is a product category rule. I don't want to get too technical, but it's basically a rule book on how an LCA should be conducted. And when you follow that rule book, you're really able to conduct the LCA properly and disclose the relevant information. So that's it from my side, guys. Thanks a lot for your time and listening. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Siddharth. We have a couple questions in the chat, and I'll start picking those up. And even I have some questions. I'll try to combine everything and put it your way. So something that Manoj asks is that what is the difference between scope 1, 2, 3 emissions and LCA? And if you could also add a third layer of PCF, product carbon footprint. Could you give us the difference between these three, scope 1 to 3 emissions, then LCA and product carbon footprint?
Okay, cool. Very, very heavy loaded question. A very good question indeed, I would say. So, in LCA, you must have seen in the case study, there's scope 1 involved, there's scope 2 involved, and there's scope 3 definitely involved in the whole LCA, right? And the idea behind the LCA is to capture all the three scopes, all right? And you don't want to leave any particular impact out of the whole LCA. So I would say scope 1 to 3 GHG accounting is done mostly at an organization level when you want to calculate the footprint, let's say annual emissions of an organization as a whole. LCA is more definitive for a specific product, I would say. Uh, and PCF is something that only looks at the carbon footprint of the product. It doesn't look at the other impact indicators I spoke of. I spoke of impact of eutrophication, ozone depletion layers, right? And many others. So there's a lot of impact categories that LCA comes out with, but PCF only sticks to the carbon footprint of a product. And it looks at whether the truthful data has been captured during the PCF study, whether the right sources have been used. So PCF is a lot more geared to only footprint. LCA is footprint plus a lot of other impact categories as well. And I would say scope 1 to 3 GHG counting is more relevant for an organization as a whole.
Got it. Yes, Manoj, also adding to that as an example, right? Like, say for a manufacturing company, they will have a manufacturing plant where the product is manufactured and they'll have a head office somewhere elsewhere, right? So the electricity consumed in this entire setup is part of the scope 2 of this organization, but I believe the electricity that's consumed in the head office does not feature in the LCA calculation. Only the aspects that touch the product directly are kind of included, right? Perfect. Another question that Syed asks is that, is it mandatory to verify our LCA report from a third party before going for the EPD verification?
Yes, that is a mandate. It's important to have. So basically, EPD is the system created. So there are multiple EPD systems. There's EPD Norway. There's EPD International. These are institutions that have been created to truthfully disclose the environmental impact of different products. And one of the ways in which they maintain that trust and transparency is to have a third party come in and verify these studies. So yes, it is mandatory if you want to publish an EPD, you have to go through a third party verification.
Got it. Thank you. The next question is from Bharat. Bharat asks that if LCA is practiced in India only due to legislative or compliant needs, what are some of the resources to see current legislative needs for different sectors, right? And if there are also organizations that are doing it more voluntarily. And I think his interests lie more in the agriculture sector and the biodiversity impact of products from the agriculture sector. It's a complex question. Do you want me to repeat it?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Same. While I was saying it, even I was like, or Bharat, would you want to maybe unmute
Yeah,
yourself?
maybe you can unmute and just
Yeah.
Sure, sorry, I was just writing my thoughts out. I guess my question was, within LCA, is it purely due to legislative sort of pressure, or are there companies volunteering to do LCAs? That was one of my high-level questions. And the second question was more around, I think what was revealing in your presentation was that there could be particular sort of impact lenses that can be applied to it, right? Where you said, different frameworks instead of just doing emissions and carbon. I'm wondering if LCA has been used to do biodiversity impacts in general. Like, has there been any sort of lens like that, and is it sort of coming up? So I hope that simplifies.
Right. Thanks a lot, Bharat. For the first part of your question, LCA, I don't think has been mandated anywhere to be done, right? For the time being. There are no mandates right now for companies to do LCAs. So it's purely a voluntary push that companies are doing this because. And ultimately, the drive comes from the market because of the whole push towards making more informed decisions that are geared towards ESG. Uh, Companies are doing these LCAs voluntarily for their products. They are publishing EPDs voluntarily for them. And a major advantage comes from the market, like I said. So if you want to do a green building certification, LEED demands that you use some products within your building which have EPDs, right? So this is a mandate, I would say a push coming from a certification body, not from the government, right? But still, it pushes the market to sort of conduct LCA studies and publish EPDs out there. Even in IGBC, you would see that there is something called as a Green Pro certification, where a lot of construction materials are certified based on their manufacturing and a host of other elements. And a part of that certification process also, you must do an LCA, right? So this is again a market-driven push, not a mandate, right? So these are some of the ways in which LCA is being pushed out and used. Apart from the usual reasons, maybe for your marketing, or one might also do an LCA for their own internal understanding. If you are a company which has to choose between a plastic packaging or a paper packaging, how are you going to make an informed decision unless you make a whole study around it, right? So that's again an internal benefit to the company, right? It may not be a mandate. Now, coming to the second part of your question, I have read very little studies. I'll be very honest with you on LCAs as a driving mechanism to understand the true, let's say, biodiversity impact of a product system. And even though the impact indicators do quantify the impact in terms of how it impacts the water in that area, how it impacts the land use patterns, how it impacts the sequestration capacity, and so forth. But I think there's still a lot of development that has to happen before LCA is really being used as a tool or a mechanism to quantify impact on biodiversity. I feel it still has some maturity to go about it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Another question from Priya Ranjan is that could you please throw some light on unit rationalization and its importance?
What do you mean by unit rationalization?
Priya Ranjan, do you want to unmute and further clarify?
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you, Siddharth, for very insightful session. So basically, in LCA, we take all the aspects in different units, like carbon, CO2 in kg, or other things, different things in the different units. So, how important it is to rationalize it in a single to get the final output?
See, yeah, this is something I haven't covered in the slides, but this is slightly more advanced. So when you do a whole life cycle study, when you push out the results, you need to characterize and normalize them. So you're able to come up with some common unit in which the results are communicated, right? And there are many methods. So in SEMA Pro, we have a separate feature and a tool. A lot of softwares have this feature and tool where they do a separate characterization and normalization of the results, so it becomes easier to be communicated. But what I can do is, it'll be difficult to explain this on call, but what I can do is maybe share some links on how you can go about the process.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Yeah, tour पे चलें.
Awesome. Next question is from Varad. Varad wanted to know how you deal with material issues. Okay, I think that was you, Emma. Yes, okay. Varad wanted to know how to deal with material issues of product or services that are highly dynamic in nature and may affect the results of the LCA. Varad, would you want to maybe unmute and give us an example? It seems like you might have an example in mind.
Hey, hi guys, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Hi Siddharth, thank you for the insightful session. Right, so I just wanted to understand you in the case study that you took a bunch of issues that concern the steel pallet across its life cycle. So what if those issues are dynamic in nature? So for example, if you're looking at an EV two-wheeler, um, maybe the source of your lithium-ion batteries or the methodology of uh, the or the manufacturing process these factors are highly dynamic because the industry itself is evolving, right? So would maybe an EV manufacturing company want to do an LCA at this stage? Because these factors are evolving, very quickly. So, yeah. So how do you take that into account?
Right. So as you rightly said, Varad, there are the varying impacts that might come across from from the same product, right? It can be manufactured in multiple locations. Or if I do an LCA today of a product, and if I do the same LCA, same product 2 years down the line, I might get different results, right? So so there's a very important factor when you publish an LCA report. You have to firstly clearly mention what is the goal and scope of the study, right? So what is the functional unit or declared unit at hand for which you're doing the LCA? Secondly, you have to clearly define the system boundaries. So the boxy chart I had shown during the presentation, right, from A1 to module D, it clearly asks you to specify which modules are included and which are not, right? And you have to be very clear about the exclusions of the studies as well, as importantly as what has been included in the study. So that clearly defines and differentiates your system boundary. And I would recommend that when you do your LCA, you stick to a specific time period, right? So you could be collecting data over a month, 3 months. That might give you some distorted results. It's always good to take data, let's say, over a year's period, and that brings more credibility to the results because you get the whole data set of a year to now analyze and average out. And like I said, once you define the time coverage, the time from which the data was captured, the system boundary which was considered, and the map that I had drawn about this whole supply chain of the product, you need to have a very clear map of your supply chain in mind before going ahead with the study, right? Otherwise, you might go way down into the details of, let's say, again, in the example of steel pallet, I didn't go way down to the mining facility when the steel was taken out from, or the steel ore was taken out from, right? But that impact is still calculated when I'm using a software like SEMA Pro, which ultimately does take those impacts into consideration. So I think you need to sort of have a clear definition of your system boundary and understand what the software can take care of and what are the additional elements you need to bring into the LCA. So I think that will help you really streamline the whole process.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Varad. Next question from Sri Lakshmi. She asks, are there any other databases apart from IdeaMart that can be considered for LCA? I believe you already mentioned a few. Just if you could just re-mention some of those LCA, some of those databases, yeah.
Yeah, so EcoInvent is a database which is the most widely used globally. EcoInvent supplies databases on almost all kinds of materials and energies. And there are specific databases depending on the sector in which you want to do the LCA in. So for example, if you want to do a more agriculture product-oriented LCA, there is Agribulus, right, which is a separate data set which is found, which you can persist. For a electronic item LCA, there are different data sets, right? So it depends on what kind of product or a sector in which you want to do the LCA. You can easily find the relevant databases and then go ahead with. But the most commonly one is EcoInvent, there is Agribulus, and so forth.
Got it. Thank you. The next one is by Lagnajit. He asks, how can LCA be used in ESG investing? And again, we might have to think a little bit about this, Sid, but yeah. So how can LCA be used in ESG investing? And is there any relation between the two?
Interesting. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, Arvind, go ahead.
Yeah, hi Siddharth. Thanks for the nice presentation. Even my question is also similar to this, which I posted to Rushi.
Yeah.
Okay. So see, like I said during my presentation also, LCA really helps you make informed choices, right? And I'll explain this question with an example. A friend of mine owned a startup where they used plastic waste to make some products, right? And he was about to go into a investment round to some VCs, and uh, you know he went prepared during the VC round. He went with his own analysis of how his company has contributed to saving the environment. He's done his LCA studies and so forth, and the investor found it very insightful in a way that the product, okay, the company is disclosing its environmental footprint or savings in a very scientific manner, in a very open domain manner. So that helps to bring a lot of credibility and trust towards investors as well, right? And let's say if you're making a decision on which startup to invest in, and if one of your main criteria is looking at the environmental impact of that business, do an LCA for both its products and services, and that should give you a very, very good insight on what kind of investments you want to give to either of those companies, right? So I think LCA will really help you to make that choice between company A, company B, and so forth.
Got it. Thank you. I believe Ahmad Raza has a question. He's not really posted it. He's just pointed out that he would like to raise a question. Ahmad, do you want to unmute and ask the question?
Yeah, ma'am. Thank you. How we can calculate the scope 3? You can define this. How we can calculate the scope 3? We also calculate scope 1 and 2, but many difficulties and hundreds in scope 3 calculations.
Got it. Sid, do you want me to take that question?
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'll start. Would love to hear your comments also, Sid. So Ahmad, what happens is that scope 3 has 15 different categories, right? And not all 15 categories are relevant to all industries, right? So the first step you should do is to figure out which scope 3 categories are relevant to your business, to your industry, right? That is step number one. And again, all of that information is available on the internet, right? In case, right? I think today we might not have time to get into it, but you feel free to kind of email us which sector you are in, and we could respond with some more clarity on that, right? So that is the first step. Second is that within each category as well, the GHG protocol provides about 2 to 3 different methodologies of calculation, right? And these methodologies are determined by the data that you have. I'll give you an example. The first category, purchase goods and service. There are multiple methods of calculating that, right? The most easiest and the simplest and the fastest way to do it is by spend analysis, right? Which is you can go to your procurement team. You could ask them that, hey, what was our spend across multiple HSN or NIC categories, right? Every vendor you have, whenever they give your company a bill, there will be an HSN code on top, right? Which is linked to the kind of service or product they're providing you, right? So there are databases available that give you the ton CO2 emissions per INR, right? Companies like SIDS and ours have those databases, right? So you can then very easily do that multiplication, extract that data. Certain advanced companies go all the way of collecting that data directly from their suppliers, right? Wherein they go to their suppliers, ask them what's the scope 1, what's the scope 2, how much business they do with the supplier, and they extract that data. This is just one example, right? All the 15 categories have multiple methodologies, and the most suitable methodology for you is entirely dependent on the kind of data that you have today available, right? I know I'm there is a lot more to scope 3, right? Scope 3 could be a whole different webinar, but Ahmed, we're happy to take this offline and kind of go deeper into your exact case, and we can help you with that, right?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I think another conversation has been having that's been had on the chat Sid, is that, and again, Rohit asked it, but we already got it resolved, but would love to hear your thoughts also. So Rohit asks that is the new ISO 14071 standard on LCA, does it make the ISO 14040 standard redundant? And Shweta already answered that that 14071 is the LCA critical review, and it makes
Right.
ISO 14040 redundant. And even Gautam's gone back and done some research and kind of said that yes, that is correct. So would love to hear your thoughts, and then we can move on to other questions. Yeah.
Right. So see, I'll segregate those two things. So ISO 14040 and 44 gives you clear guidelines on how you need to do your LCA, how you need to create a LCA report, right? And the 14071 guidelines deals with how you have to review that LCA report which has been created. So it's again like a LCA making framework and a LCA reviewing framework. So it complements each other, I would say, rather than making it redundant. So obviously it's not redundant. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. Lagnanjeet has another question. He asked that you mentioned that LCA is done by taking a particular year in mind, right? Now, what if there are several technological changes in that year itself or the year after that? Do companies have to do this LCA again and again as these changes come about?
Practically for a company to make multiple technological changes in a year is also pretty difficult. I mean, you're disrupting your manufacturing process itself, right? So so if the question is about when you started your LCA, you had one technology, but by the end of your LCA, the technology has been shifted. I would suggest you also change your goalpost slightly because see, it's important to have the correct representativeness of the data. So if your technology is changing to a degree where you feel is going to have a major impact on the results of the LCA, definitely I would recommend to sort of account for that in your LCA, or maybe even conduct a new one in a couple of years down the line.
Got it. Perfect. Another question, another question that I got is that, what are some of the common misconceptions? Okay, wait, I'll park this. Arvind, do you want to go next? Because we have only 3 minutes.
Yeah,
Yeah, Arvind, over to you.
yeah, yeah. Just need a more clarifications on the ESG linked with the LCA, and there are other frameworks like GRI and TCFD. How they will because someone will follow GRI, someone will follow TCFD, and how it can be related to LCA and with various countries for that, and BRSR too. So can you put light on it, Siddharth?
Yeah, sure. So I know for sure that the BRSR specifically asks for it asks whether you have conducted LCAs and to also disclose some of the LCAs that have been conducted. So see, the reason behind this is uh, even through an ESG report, the idea is to uncover as much as information as possible regarding and this is specific to the E part, right? The environmental impact of the product throughout its life that the company is manufacturing, right? So if you're a manufacturing company, uh, I think that's going to be a lot more relevant to you. And maybe I can maybe take a slightly different perspective, and maybe Arushi can follow up on that. Is a lot of ESG reports are now being rated, right? You have EcoVadis coming in, CDP coming in, and so forth. And there are other rating agencies as well. So I think one of the great ways you can improve your rating is to conduct these LCA studies. So you're able to uncover more information about the product's impact and then take corrective actions on how to reduce that. So I think overall picture on the ESG, it will definitely have to improve it.
Yeah. Adding to that,
Okay, so in that case, if my company is following GRI and we are the ESG compliance we are following, and if EPD certification will EPD will follow which certification, as we are the ESG compliant. So they will follow a GRI or how it is.
No, so see, these are two different things, right? If you want to do a GRI-based sustainability report, entirely up to you. So see, LCA deals with the, like I said, environmental impact of a specific product,
Yes.
right? And when you make a sustainability report of an organization with a GRI or a BRSR or a TCFD framework, it's done at an organization level. So I would say a GRI report is a larger umbrella around the whole LC aspect, and I wouldn't really try and correlate these two in a way one impacts the other, right? It's entirely up to the company whether they want to do a GRI or a TCFD or a BRSR. But see, LCA is something that's going to add value to your ESG report, regardless of what framework is being used.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anirudh, if I may add to that, right? I think just some time ago, Siddharth established the difference between scope 1, 2, 3 and LCA, right? There is a similar layer to this, right? Like how, again, scope 1, 2, 3 is for the organization, LCA is for the product. Similarly, BRSR is slightly more broader, right? BRSR contains your scope 1, 2, 3, which is your organization level metric, right? And then BRSR gets into other ESG parameters as well, such as water, waste, biodiversity impact, human rights, people, employees, policies, etc. So it's kind of more it's kind of more holistic from an organization level. However, just like Siddharth said, BRSR does have lots of questions where they do ask that have you done an LCA for any of your product, right? Another thing that companies do is that a company could have 50 products and they might choose to do LCA for only one product for whatever reason, right? So even that's a possibility. And so you should not like the purpose of doing a BRSR report is very different from the purpose of doing an LCA, right? So yeah, companies take a call depending on who is this external stakeholder asking for this.
Okay.
Perfect. So folks, we're right on time. Thank you so much for your time today. This was super interactive. We honestly learned a lot through your questions. Thank you so much, everyone who asked questions, and also, of course, everyone who didn't.
Most welcome, Arashvi.
Yeah.
Yes.
And thank you so much, Siddharth. I mean, this topic has, I mean, I myself learned a lot. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for taking us through this presentation. Helped us visualize the entire process a lot better. And yes, have a good weekend, folks, and have a good Friday night.
Great. Thanks a lot, folks, for tuning in, and hope this was an interesting session for you guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.